Welcome to the Low Carb Consultant Podcast, where I speak with leading experts, trainers, and athletes in the low carb, fasting, and strength and conditioning communities to ultimately discover the best health and nutritional advice available. Today's guest is Jonathan Shane, a low carb endurance athlete, coach, and overall incredibly smart guy. We discuss his journey through early childhood obesity, how he found the ketogenic diet, and ultimately how he started running and coaching endurance athletes for better performance using various low-carb diet approaches. Let's jump into it. All right, Jonathan, great to have you on, man.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was super stoked that you decided to come on the show, and definitely excited to chat with you about all the running, the coaching, the endurance, the diet. I want to get into all that stuff. First off, real quick, Jonathan Shane, that's a strong name, bro. It's got like Clark Kent vibes to it. Have you ever heard that?
No, but I've heard the opposite of like, oh, it's funny you have two first names, which funny enough, my middle name is Scott. So my full name is like three first names, Jonathan Scott Shane.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
firm.
Yeah, very firm name,
Yeah.
strong name, superhero name, kind of. Very cool. Very cool. Well, yeah, maybe before we jump into all the exercise stuff and diet and coaching, which is definitely where I want to go, maybe to give some of the listeners who don't know who you are quite yet, maybe just give them a real brief background on yourself and maybe how you started on this journey of yours.
Absolutely, yeah. So my journey really starts when I was younger. So kind of grew up in a not fully healthy family situation. Picked up emotional eating from my parents early on. By the time I was 14, I was morbidly obese. Really, I was 270 pounds. 5'10". I was a big kid, dude. And got scared by the doctor when I went in for my annual checkup. Decided I wanted to lose weight. Lost all the weight in a really conventional, my diet was literally skim milk, chicken breast, whey protein powder, spinach leaves, and Captain Crunch. That was literally my diet.
Yeah.
And it worked. I lost weight, but it also made me develop a lot of, obviously, I didn't know it at the time, but like hormone dysregulation, a lot of issues. And I started having binge eating problems. And there's also a lot of sociology with that. Like, people were treating me better. I wasn't getting bullied anymore. I was getting, all that. So I developed this like fat phobia. I developed this real fear around gaining weight again, but I was having these binges. And so my answer as an adolescent teen was to make myself start throwing up. And so developed very severe bulimia. Had that for about 2 years, about 2.5 years into that, I found my faith in Jesus. And that was a real turning point for me from that perspective, because it was like, oh, well, okay, someone died for this body. I can't just beat it up, right? So I really started to try and deal with it just from like an intentional standpoint. But obviously, like it didn't fully go away because there's so many other layers to it. Like it's not just like you can't just spiritually or mentally decide to fix something. You have to address the boundaries and circumstances that are causing the temptation to give into an impulse. And so around 2017, I found the ketogenic diet. I was already married at the time, and I got on the diet. And for some reason, I couldn't explain it at the time, but like I just stopped struggling with my binges. Like I was just able to, I went 9 months without relapsing on my bulimia, which is the longest I had gone since I developed the eating disorder. So it was a really powerful like wake up call, like, oh wow, food matters. Like and not just portions or like the dieting approach, but like the food choices themselves, the quality of the food. And then I did a bodybuilding show. After the bodybuilding show, the re-dieting process after that is really rough. I'd never experienced it before, and so I ended up relapsing. It was September of 2020, I want to say 2018. Yeah, 2018. And then that's when I kind of realized, that's when it all came together. Like I had the spiritual figured out, I had the nutrition figured out, but then I realized there was a level of like self-care and self-identity that I didn't really have figured out yet. And so I really started to speak out about that. And that's kind of how I started to gain traction on social media anyways, was just a guy doing keto, which was hot in like 2018, 2019. So I was doing keto, which was like, it's like the most Googled word. Plus I was talking about eating disorders, which was really rare in male spaces. And so that's kind of how I started to like gain traction in general, I guess. And just I haven't relapsed in bulimia since. That was the last time I ever made myself throw up from in that circumstance. And so did keto, did bodybuilding preps, all that jazz. Started coaching keto, all that. And then in 2020, COVID happened. I was prepping for a show. Show got canceled, and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life. I just dieted for no reason. So I went and got a photo shoot done. That was cool. I was like, what am I gonna do with all this energy? You know, I was like, well, I guess the world's my oyster. I'm not locked. I can leave my house at least because I live in Texas, thank God. And so they let me. I just went for a run, and I was like, ooh, that was fun. I ran like 4 miles. I was like, oh, okay. So next day I ran four more, and then I ran four more, and then I ran four, and I was like, hey, I like this. This is because I have ADHD, and I was like, wow, like this is really like euphoric for me. And of course, I'm a balls to the walls kind of guy, and so like,
Mhm.
my immediate thought was like, let's qualify for Boston. You know, having no idea what that takes. Ran my first marathon. That was in April of 2020. March of 2021, ran my first marathon. Did it in 4 hours and 20 minutes. Totally blew up on mile 20. But I fell in love with it. Oh my gosh, I fell in love with the pain, the overcoming the pain, the doing something hard. It was just, I was like, man, this is my thing, dude. I like this. I like this endurance stuff, and I think I'd be good at it. And then decided to take a chance at an ultra because I started reading after that I started getting into David Goggins for a little bit, and I was like, yeah, do hard things, you know. So I signed up for a 50-mile ultra. So literally within 16 months, I went from never running at all to running my first 50-mile ultra. I got 12th overall in that race, and it was hard. The last 13 miles of that were just, I have a whole YouTube video documentary about it. But it was just such a moment for me. I was like, man, I could be good at this. So then I got super fixated on it. But during the time of training for the marathon, just to backtrack a little, I started to notice that the strict ketogenic diet was giving me problems. At first, it was fine. I was progressing well, but all of a sudden, I started to get really high heart rate, resting heart rate. My blood sugar, I started to get like pre-diabetic fasted glucose numbers. My ketones weren't coming up anymore. It's all these issues. I started getting injured, and I started getting depression. I was like, what is going on? This is so weird. And I started dealing with it. I tried so many, I started gaining weight, trying all these, I was running 50 miles a week and I was gaining weight. And I was like, what the heck this is so weird. And one of my friends was like, hey, just try carbs. And at that time I was like really anti-carb. I was like, no way I'm eating carbs. But then I was like, you know what? I'm holding on to this because I pride that I haven't had a carb in 5 years. I was like, I should just try this. And if it doesn't work, now I know it doesn't work because I can't say it doesn't work just because I feel like it doesn't work. I actually have to I have to put it to the test, right? So I started strategically implementing carbs into my training, and within 3 days, my glucose went from like 113, 120 all the way back down to the 80s. And then within 2 weeks, I was back in ketosis, introducing carbs into my regimen, which was such an eye opener for me to understanding that biology and physiology is so much more complex than we think it is. And then all of a sudden, my time started getting better. My resting heart rate came down, and next thing you know, I was progressing again. And then we get into like the timeline of like the ultra marathon and all that jazz. Um, and then so during that period of time, I was really focused on hormones because I went to school as a nutritional therapist, and I specialized in metabolic health and hormones. And so I started to notice that women that were long-term keto carnivore eaters were exhibiting the same symptoms I was exhibiting when I was running. And I was like, okay, I had a client. I was like, hey, can I use you as a guinea pig? Are you open to like trying something new? And she's like, yeah. And so I started to do the same tactics for my running that I did just her in general in her life. And she started to respond positively. And I was like, okay, so women benefit from some carbs on a ketogenic diet. Okay, there's something here that no one's talking about. So then I got really into women's health and hormones and like implementing a sustainable ketogenic approach that introduced carbohydrates and things like that. Started talking about that at conferences, KetoCon, all these things. Really, really controversial at the time, dude. There was like me and like one other person talking about this on stage. Um, and then probably I'd say about 2022 was when I really felt like I understood running, I understood nutrition, I understood it well enough to feel confident and start coaching people. And so I started really focusing on low carb endurance and performance. And that kind of catapults us to now is like, I've been doing this for like, I've been ketogenic for almost 8 years. I've been a low carb runner for going on 5 now. Like I've really gotten this figured out, and I've built a system around it to help people, one, scratch the itch of wanting to adopt a more whole food ketogenic approach, like a healthier whole food approach to their life, while also optimizing their performance as endurance athletes. And so I think it's a cool world. It's a cool world I live in.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, going back to you speaking at a lot of these conferences, especially like a keto conference, and talking about implementing carbs. I can only imagine how some people were, receiving some of that information. But I think I agree with you a lot, as the as the activity level starts to rise, you need to introduce, especially if you're doing like endurance, right? And obviously, I think genetics plays a role, and certain blood markers play a role into like who this works really, really well for, or whatever the case is. But I think like introducing like carbohydrate sources, especially if you're an endurance athlete, like it kind of becomes, at a point, like you were just getting at, it kind of becomes necessary at some point if your physical activity is just getting to a completely different level. I'm curious. So when you started introducing the carbohydrate sources, how did you, like, what were you playing around with? How did you start implementing them into your training, your diet? And what types of carb sources were you playing around with, like in terms of like the actual food type?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's because it's evolved over time as I've gotten more comfortable with the idea. When I first started, like the first two carbs I introduced were acorn squash and sweet potatoes. And I remember the first bite I had of sweet potato, like for the first time in 4 years, it felt so dirty. It felt so wrong. I was like, this is wrong, dude. This is wrong. But then like I saw the benefits and I was like, I guess I can't say it's wrong anymore. As far as the approach though, so I really took a more targeted ketogenic approach at first. So the idea was, I like to train fasted. It has never changed. Obviously there's nuance there that we can dive into, but just in overall. And so my idea was, okay, so after my run, I'm going to include 50 grams of a starchy carbohydrate to see what it does to my blood sugar and my ketones and how it makes me feel. So went for a run, and I have a whole spreadsheet, dude. I could share. Like I have this whole spreadsheet of doing this from like years ago. Um, but I introduced the carbohydrates, targeted, and 2 hours later, my blood sugar went from the 120 it was fasted to 89. I didn't see an 89 in months, and I was like, "What the actual? This is so backwards from everything I thought I knew. This is so bizarre."
Interesting.
Um, but so I kept targeting, and that's really what it was at first. It was like during my training days, I'm gonna target carbs, and then we'll see what it does. I don't know if you want to go further from that, but that's kind of like the initial process that I started.
Yeah, and going back to because I'm a big proponent of fasted training as well, and I think again that also depends on the person, the situation, all those types of things. But like once I eat, it becomes very difficult for me to like want to train.
Yeah,
I feel sluggish, and I just feel so much. And you know, back in my CrossFit days, in like 2012, 2013, 2014, there was absolutely no way I was working out without something in my stomach. I
yeah,
thought it was blasphemy to train fasted and pointless and muscle wasting. And now there's like no way I could train. There's no way I could not train unfasted. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
I need to go into a workout without anything in my system. I just feel so much better. Um, in terms, I kind of wanted to go here with you, since we're talking about fasted training, because I had this question I wanted to ask you, and you were talking about some of your background with, the bulimia and the eating disorder. What is your thoughts on fasting in general? Like especially when you're speaking with a client, do like you implement fasting for yourself at all? Is there a time and place for it? I was curious on that.
Yeah, so I think bare bones, I think that fasting is something that should come natural. I
Hmm.
think it should be if you're eating and you feel satiated, you don't feel like eating a meal, skip it. Like I think that bare bones foundationally, that's how it should be. I think fasting should be this intuitive thing that we do when we're eating the right foods that complement our body. I think beyond that, we can get more nuanced. So we'll take it two ways. The first one is weight loss. Let's say someone's trying to lose weight. They don't want to track macros. They just want to calorically restrict in a way that's more sustainable, doesn't feel like they're being too regimented. That's when I will implement a fasting routine for a client. I never do it at first. Like the first phase of my program for anybody, regardless of whether they're an athlete or they're just trying to lose weight and get in shape, is fat adaptation. And I'm really big on that fasting during that time because I feel like one thing people do wrong when they do adopt a ketogenic diet is they immediately go into a deep caloric restriction. And so their body doesn't really get as fat adapted as quickly because they're dealing with a lot of corticosteroids and stress responses just from the
Uh-huh.
dieting in general. And my theory is no, increase fats, keep calories at a maintenance level, and let your body get very used to using fats in a stress-free environment. Then we'll start to take away the dietary fat once your body's acclimated to the environment. I see a much better positive response long-term to that. And so I think in terms of, again, if someone wants to lose weight, I'll implement some kind of fasting. I think that it's obviously good for autophagy. I think they can be argued because there's been studies done on like time restricted feeding and caloric restriction, and autophagy is almost the same in both. But again, if someone doesn't want to restrict calories that way, then the fasting makes sense, right? It's still good for autophagy. I think it's good spiritually. I think it's good for, developing self-control. I think that it can be abused. I think it's one of the most abused dieting tools out there. As far as bulimic, so that's actually something I've talked about with clients is like, because there's bulimia, which is like actively making yourself throw up. And then there's what I refer to as bulimic tendencies. Like an example of a bulimic tendency would be someone that, binges all night Saturday night. And so they go on a 3-day fast the next day to kind of like recover from it. And that becomes like a cycle in their life. That is a very bulimic tendency because you're not physically purging the food, but you're purging the food by making yourself fast, right? So I think that it's a slippery slope if it's not done with the right perspective and the right intentions. But I think all that being said, I think fasting can be a great tool, and I think that it comes naturally to a lot of humans, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's been abused, and it's not encouraged well with the person's unique mental position in mind, right? It's just kind of like thrown out there like, hey, fast, let's go on a 5-day fast, not considering the person's eating relationship, not considering their history, not considering their physiology. So again, yeah, I think it's good. I just think it's abused.
Yeah, I think I would 100% agree with you there. Like, you definitely need to take it on a case by case basis, and obviously, like, yeah, jumping into like a 5-day fast without knowing any of the person's like background and physiology, it's like that might be a massive step. Implement it in short stints if that's like the way you want to go. But I think too, if the person is active, right, if they have a certain level of right, I do like fasting, but also knowing how active I am, I also know that it can be somewhat detrimental to some of the personal goals that I have in terms of muscle mass or what I'm trying to do from like a workout and performance standpoint. Like sometimes it's might not be the best just based off my activity. And I think you got to take it on a case by case basis for sure. Going back to real quick around the carb thing, because I wanted to maybe get some of the numbers that you were playing around with when you started to implement carbs. And I think, I don't know if I caught this correctly, but so you were starting when you were implementing carbs, let's say post run, and you were noticing some of the different measurements in your glucose and stuff like that. Like, and you were playing around with, I think you said acorn squash, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember like what the carbohydrate amount was? Like, was it 50, 75, 100? Like, I was curious there.
Yeah, so it started around 50 and then it started to go up there because something I got into is like once I started to feel better, I started to increase my training volume and I started to notice that what I was using wasn't working anymore. And so that's when I like, oh, so different amounts of training volume require different amounts of glycogen replenishment and cortisol suppression. Okay, right? So I started to become really familiar with that in general. So like, I have the spreadsheet pulled up right here. I mean, I don't know. Can I share with you? Am I allowed
You
to
can.
share?
You should be able to share your screen.
I've never shared this spreadsheet on a podcast before.
No. Oh yeah, this is gonna be awesome.
You see it?
Yes, I do.
Enter a picture in picture automatically. Don't allow. I don't want you automatically. Okay, cool. All right. So, you can see it?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so you can see here, right? So like standard so SKD is standard ketogenic diet, right? So fasted. Now, I love keto bricks and stuff, so take that with a grain of salt. But it was just to show that even on a really high, it wasn't to say that like keto bricks gave me really high fasted glucose the next day. They don't do that. But it was just to show that even on 85% fat for the day, I was still waking up with pre-diabetic blood sugar numbers. Right?
Interesting.
You can see that right here, right? So this is that. So I fasted all day. I had 2 bricks. That's all I had for food. So 2,000 calories, 160 grams of fat, 60 grams of protein, very ketogenic. And I was still waking up with 111 gram fasted glucose, right?
And just out of curiosity, it looks like to me you were wearing like a CGM during this, correct?
I was tracking everything, dude.
Yeah.
And so you can see my weight here, right? So this is all standard keto, right? Terrible. I put terrible run right here. The glucose numbers were just, I mean, like I was showing pre-diabetic numbers and I was running 50 miles a week. I've been strict keto for a year. Like it made no sense. And so right here on Monday, the 21st, I introduced my first carb meal post run. It's 50 grams of carbs. My run was terrible, as has been, as I put. Started targeted keto. And the next day, look at my blood sugar. I broke
Wow.
190. I was like, what? So then I was like, all right, I'm going to try sweet potato. Blood glucose was 79 2 hours after the meal. Hold on. What's going on here? Blood sugar again, under the 90. So this isn't, and then, my ketones didn't really phase, but the blood sugar was coming down. Notice here, after 3 days, my aches and my pains left my tendons and my bones, right?
Interesting.
Right. My tempo run still sucked, not good, right? But I was starting to notice benefits, right? And then 2 days later, 80 grams. So I broke 80. My blood sugar fasted was 80, 79, 4 days after starting this. Had a terrible run that Friday. So this is like a 5-day period, right? So I'm just trying this. I'm tracking everything because I'm noticing what's happening, what's not. And then
And real quick, real quick, I have a question. So when you were monitoring this blood sugar, was this upon waking?
Yes, this was upon waking. This is all fasted glucose, just to see how my body was responding in terms of recovery over the course of the day.
Got it.
And then on Saturday, so 5 days in, I had my best run in a while. So I didn't break aerobic threshold, and I was able to maintain a 10-30 minute per mile pace. I hadn't been able to do that in months. And I was like, okay, I'm on to something. And so I just kept going. And then you can just see my blood sugar just kept getting better and better, 64, 73. And then here's what really blew my mind. So you can see like feel good, legs feel good, feel good, feel good, feel good, feel good. Everything started to get better. And then here's what was really crazy was on Saturday the 3rd. So this was a roughly, let's see, 12 days after starting this protocol, I woke up in nutritional ketosis. And that's when I was really just like, okay, I don't understand anything. All the years I've been learning, there's just so much I don't know right now. No one's talking about this. I don't understand what's going on. Why is this working this way? And it just continued to get better and better. And you can even see, right? Like I have these charts here. And as I implemented the TGAD, you can just see this line. It just goes down and my ketones go up, right? So, and this is as I'm increasing carbohydrates in my diet. So it was so perplexing to me what was going on.
Totally.
But I was seeing it happen. Like I couldn't argue with how I was feeling and what the numbers were showing. And I was like, there's something to this for endurance athletes that no one's talking about. And then as we kept going, I started to finally lose weight again. I lost like 3 or 4 pounds. Oh yeah, this is important too. Calories did not change. My calories didn't change at all. Right. So I just started losing weight while increasing carbs and letting my body get back to a place where it was metabolically healthy. And so it was just that whole experiment was just so counterintuitive to what I believed for so long, especially again, in the context of endurance athletes. I think if we're talking like the average Joe Blow, especially men that are just trying to get healthy, I don't think this conversation is necessarily relative to them at all.
Yeah. I've got so many questions. So when you started, so then you were slowly increasing the carbohydrates. Was that per day? Like when you started to wake up in nutritional ketosis, what gram of carbohydrates were you at? Because you started with 50, and then what were you doing? Like just adding like 10, 15, 20, like a day? Or like how was your progression on that?
No, it's a good question. It's a lot more gradual than that. So I was doing like, I would say, because I was basically the way I was doing it was I had my 20 to 30 total I did anyways. And then I just added the 50 on top to my, like after my run. So I was doing like 80 a day in total. And that went on for a couple months. And then as I was like, okay, I'm ready to train for a race, I started to increase my training load. And I started to notice that those amount of carbs, while I didn't feel as bad as I felt before I started adding them, I didn't feel as good as I felt when I started adding them. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to increase carbs. And that's when I started playing. That's when I started playing with like feeding myself during my runs, not when I start my runs. That's an interesting conversation we can get into. But in the middle of my speed work and my long runs, adding carbohydrates into it, in a strategic way, that really helped. And then I started to notice that when my rain, like right before a race, when my training really got intense, like you're starting to peak for the race, peak mileage, peak intensity in the gym, all that. I really just had to go to more of like a low carb diet. Like every day got up to like 150, 160 grams of carbs just to keep me even. And that's when like, and again, this is all new for me, right? Like now I have a program where like these are like phases for my clients to like walk through, and I can like teach them exactly how to do it and why. But at this time in my life, I had no idea what the hell was going on. Like
Yeah.
I was just really learning as I went. And so that's kind of like the progression of it was just like learning like carbs are good for endurance athletes. Different amounts of carbs during different cycles of their training are important. Different phases require different things. Different types of runs require different things. And just learning what all that meant as I like progressed.
Oh my God. So this is actually really, really cool. So what was the carb intake? What was the daily carb intake at the point where you were actually, because now this is kind of giving me an idea on how your body was actually, basically what it sounds like is you were just becoming a lot more metabolically flexible,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And what was the carb intake that you were at when you started waking up in nutritional ketosis? Was that still at
80.
like 150, 170?
It
How
was like
much?
80.
Really?
80. Yeah. So something I tell my clients, like, especially because sometimes I still have clients that come on because I still work with women and hormones, right? It's not like I completely, I'm like, hey, I can't work with you. Like I still like working with it. It's just not my content or my focus.
Sure.
But something I tell them, especially if they've been on keto or carnivore for a long time, is, I find that like 50 grams of carbs to like 75 is like this no man's land where like you're not really eating low enough to like your body be like, okay, I'm like starvation. I'm like, I need to produce ketones.
Yeah.
But it's also not high enough for your body to be like, oh, there's carbs coming in. Like it's not going to elicit a very good insulin response. So you're not going to get the benefits of metabolic flexibility that you want. And so I find like 80 grams of carbs is like the minimum sweet spot to start somebody if you're trying to get that positive response from carbohydrate intake. So that's kind of like why that's the bottom for me.
Sure.
And so that's when I noticed, that's when I got back into nutritional ketosis. But as my training went, my intensity went up, my ketones started to plummet again. And then so I started to increase carbs and I went back into nutritional ketosis. And
Interesting.
not to get super complicated, but there's a lot of nuance there because something we don't talk about enough is ketone efficiency. So like, for example, because the ketone monitor only sees what's in your blood at that time. And we had this weird paradox view of ketones and glucose where as glucose goes up, that's bad because we're glucose resistant. But if it comes down, then we're glucose sensitive or insulin sensitive. But if ketones go down, even though we haven't changed anything, we just think something's wrong. We don't think, oh, maybe my cells are better at catching these ketones and using them. So there's a level of efficiency that I'm developing with my ketones. So for example, now I can go on a strict ketogenic diet and I very rarely show 0.5 on a blood monitor, but I know I'm using fatty acids. No one can argue that for me.
Yeah,
I
you
have
can
to
feel it.
fast for like 3 days straight to see my ketones really shoot up because I have to create enough excess because my body's just so good at using them. So I think there's some nuance there in that conversation.
Totally. No, that makes a ton of sense. And so just going back to, and the reason why I have questions on this, because like the way that I train and one of the reasons why I like using low carb diets and the way that I just look at low carb diets in general, and just my opinion, I think they're all tools, whether you're on keto or low carb or carnivore, whatever it is you're doing. Like I kind of implement all of them mainly just to give me a lot of meal variation and long-term sustainability, that type of thing. But I really like the feeling of waking up and feeling good, being in ketosis when I wake up, because I can just go about my day, not really having to think about food and then, I get my workout in and then I work and then I will eat or whatever the case is. But I guess my question going back to and then implementing the carbs piece, and there's a reason why I'm going into this because I wish I would have potentially implemented something like this when we were talking offline about my marathon training. Because when I was training for my marathon, I did everything fasted. Even when I was doing all my half marathons, everything fasted, carnivore diet. I ran the full-blown marathon on a carnivore diet, completely fasted. And I didn't take any nutrition while I was running that race because that is how I trained and I didn't want to change anything. But now thinking back to if I would have done that differently, if I would have trained differently, implemented some nutrition while I was training, I probably could have maybe gotten a little bit better of result because I would have had some excess fuel, whatever the case is. But going back to then the bringing carbs back into the diet, was there a point where, so when you got to a certain carb level, like per day, whatever, and the training was high and you were eating, what would you say you were eating at one point? I think you said like 150, 170 on like on the high end.
Yeah. Like when my training gets really close to race, my carbs will get up to 150 to 200 somewhere in there.
Okay. And then when you were waking up, were you still like, even though it might not be showing on the ketone monitor, you were probably still producing trace amounts of ketones,
Oh
right?
yeah, because you got to think
Yeah.
of, and it's something I try to explain to people, like one, if you need to replenish the glycogen, your body's just going to use it. It's not like it's just going to float in your blood. And we all know that ketone elevation or suppression is highly influenced by the level of blood glucose that we have because of insulin being present, right? And so if I eat 200 grams of carbs, but I burn through 200 grams of glycogen, my body's just going to use it for glycogen replenishment. I'm going to go right back into fat burning mode anyways, because that's what my body knows. That's its base.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, and also calorically, right? Like we think about calories too. Like if I'm eating 3,000 calories a day at the high end of my training, which is about what I would be eating, 200 grams of carbs, that's only 800 calories. That's not even a third of my caloric intake. Like I'm
Hmm.
still like, even on 200 grams of carbs a day, my fat is still almost 50% of my macronutrient breakdown. I'm still a very fat-based person. Like it's not like fat just goes out of the window. I don't want to eat fat ever again. So I think, yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so then switching into when you started bringing in carbohydrates or a fuel source, it could have been, it could have been a fat source or a carbohydrate source mid race. When did you start bringing that in, like during your training while you were running? Because I know you said earlier you weren't necessarily eating, you were doing these trainings fasted, it
Yeah.
sounded like, but then you started to play with mid training fueling.
Yeah.
What did you start playing around with? Like, because I know there's like the goops and the gels and all those types of things, which I personally wanted to stay away from. But I guess what I'm asking is, what did you start playing around with first when you started doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started playing with it, I was only still exclusively eating acorn squash, butternut squash, and sweet potato. So those are the only three things I would mess with. And what was happening was I would do like a 20-mile run training for a marathon, and I would eat afterwards, but I would start to notice that like I just wasn't like I would wake up much more sore the next morning than I typically did running that far. And I'm like, okay, so that's not enough. And I'm like, well, I don't want to eat 200 grams of carbs, within the 3 hour period I have after I run. Like that's annoying. It's
Yeah.
like, I need to figure this out. And I also noticed that during my 20-mile runs, especially if there was some kind of like race compromise structure to it, basically, if people don't know what that means, it means like you're running some of your race time intervally, like so like you do 5 miles easy, then like 5 miles at race pace, and you kind of like structure it like that. I
Hmm.
would notice when there was speed work or race pace work in there, that towards the end of the run, I would really start to lag. I didn't need to stop, right? Because my body I could always lean back into a zone two. But as a competitive runner, you know that for us to really compete in PR, we need to be able to hold a more low zone three, high zone three effort throughout a race if we really want to reach our potential. And so I could lean back into a zone two and survive, but I was like, I don't want to survive. I want to thrive. So I was like, I need to figure this out. So I went online and I looked for a meal replacement that was sweetened with stevia and had sweet potato powder in it. So I found this one. It was like sweet potato, whey protein, cacao powder, and stevia. And I was like, sweet. So I started drinking that during my runs. I started with about 20 grams an hour. So the way I played it is, because this is an interesting, I don't want to get too off topic. I want to answer your question. But what I noticed is if I had let's say I had some carbs right before my run, I would have a severe hypoglycemic response. So about 3 miles in, my blood sugar would just tank, and I would just get lightheaded, and I have to stop and like gain my like it would literally make my eyes blurry. It was like I was like, what is that? I didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So then what I noticed though is that if I started the run fasted and had my first carbs about 30 to 40 minutes into it, I didn't have that response. I felt fine. Nothing happened, which I don't know. It might be just unique to me. It's a really unique response that I have to that. But so basically, I started playing with about 20 grams of carbs every 45 minutes or so.
Hmm.
Um, excuse me. And that felt okay. But then I upped it to like 30, and then I had 35. And I really found like my sweet spot was like 30 to 40 grams of carbs an hour. And so I started playing with that meal replacement. But one thing I noticed with the meal replacement was one, it was like chocolate protein. And when you're in 90-degree weather and you're dying and you're at mile 18, the last thing you're going to put in your mouth is thick chocolate sauce. And so I didn't find that
Yeah.
enjoyable at all. I
Yeah.
was like, okay. And then I started to think, I was like, well, you know, I'm a fat adapted runner. I have plenty of body fat. I'm not single digit body fat. I got plenty of fat. I really don't need fat. I don't really need protein during this 2 hour bout. Why don't I just find a whole food carb source that I can eat without feeling nauseous or like I'm chugging zero sugar Hershey syrup, and like still get the benefits of the carbs that I need. So then I started looking into like raw honey packets, pure maple syrup packets, like things that I approve of that are whole food natural. Like, not like the goo gels, but like Spring Energy makes a good gel that's whole food based. So I started looking for whole food packets that were small, that didn't have any fat or protein, that just had the carbs that I needed to keep my glycogen happy during that bout. And so that's kind of how I got more into like the whole food, simple carb packet kind of approach to, especially the shorter distances.
Yeah, I I would say I definitely need to look into that because I think just over the years I've been so just um, ketogenic, carnivore, low carb, and not trying to take anything, mainly because I've always trained without taking like any sort of like intra-training fuel system. But I honestly think going back to when I was trying to PR a lot of my half marathon times, if I were to have incorporated that, I probably would have seen a lot better performance instead of just trying to grind it out. You know what I mean?
So I'll tell you, our conversation pre-recording and now, like listening to you, like my first thought, like I've had this thought, man, I was like, dude, I would totally get you to PR your half, dude. You would break 90 minutes. I would get you to break 90 minutes. 100% confident that would happen.
Yeah, yeah, I might have to talk to you offline about that because the wink, wink.
Uh,
Yeah, the running itch is definitely coming back into play. Speaking of just training clients and you working with clients, because I wanted to go here with you real quick. So, what would be your approach with maybe like more of a seasoned athlete versus someone who's just a beginner? Maybe they signed up for their first race, they're a little out of shape, whatever the case. Like, how do you approach the coaching from person to person? Is it kind of like a meet them where you're at? Because I know some things are going to have to be slightly different from individual to individual based off what they're coming to you with, basically.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I literally just had this message. I had someone reach out to me from an ad that I'm running, and they were talking about like the cookie cutter program their coach has them on. I can't stand cookie cutter program, especially for endurance athletes, and I get it. It's efficient, it's easy. You go and chat GDBT, like here's my thoughts, write a program, I'll sell it for $50, whatever. They can email me if they're upset, whatever. I really don't like that. I'm much more of a hands-on guy, and as you said, it's meet them where they're at. So how that kind of breaks down simply is I have 5 phases to my program. There's 3, I call it the base phase. So there's fat adaptation, protein targeting, then carb timing. And that's kind of like the base phase. So anybody, whether they're someone that's just trying to learn how to like run a mile without stopping, or someone that's trying to, run their first marathon, everybody goes through those first 3 phases. If they're training for a race, we have the race phase, and then I have the peak phase where I teach them how to like implement, change the carb and the macro ratios, how that needs to complement their training, right? Because low carb endurance training is a little bit different than high carb training, right? Because you really need to, especially at the beginning, you need to emphasize much more zone 2, and things like that. Where it really starts to separate for the seasoned athlete rather than the unseasoned athlete is the unseasoned athlete isn't fat adapted. They have no sense of aerobic threshold. They have no sense of anaerobic threshold. They have no sense of lactate. They don't have any of that, right? Their body is not used to endurance things at all. And so I really have to take them through the full duration of every win. It's like phase 1 is going to be 4 to 6 weeks. No arguments. That's just going to be how it's going to be. Phase 2 is going to be 4 to 6 weeks, and then phase 3. And then if you want to train for a race, or you're training for a race that I'm helping you with, then we'll have that conversation. With a seasoned athlete, it's a little different, because even though they might come to me and they may be a high carb athlete that wants to, prevent injury, they want to be able to retain more of their muscle during their training blocks, all the things that a ketogenic diet does benefit. but they just don't know how to do it because they're just used to, housing 300-400 grams of carbs every single day and staying away from red meat. That person's a little different because they already have an aerobic base. They already have an aerobic threshold. And so really it's about getting their body to switch to more fat focused at the base and then bring those carbs back in a way that is going to help them use them more efficiently, and it's going to be complementary instead of creating tension with their fatty acid metabolism. And so for someone like that, generally phase 1's a little bit shorter, right? It might be 3 weeks, right? Because they don't need it that long because they already have the base. Also, most seasoned athletes, I know they get really annoyed with no speed training. So like I got to keep the only zone 2 runs very short because they get really annoyed with only running slow. And so it's a little bit shorter of a window because their body adapts a lot faster to it. And then we get into phase 3, bringing the carbs back in, usually within 8 to 10 weeks rather than the 12 to 20 that it would take like an unseasoned person. And then as far as the training volume, obviously it's different. Like if someone's never ran, obviously they're going to be, I have a guy that I'm working with right now. He just wanted to be able to run 3 miles without stopping. He's running like 8 miles a week. Whereas a seasoned athlete that comes to me that's already running 60 miles a week, I might pull them down to 30 during phase 1, but we're going to get back up to 40 or 50 rather quickly, much quicker than an unseasoned athlete. And then obviously the intensity of the training, how much interval training they're doing, the tempos they're doing, the speed of the programming, depending on what their goals are and stuff. So there's definitely a lot of nuance when it comes to person, but hopefully that answered the question.
No, I think you did, and I want to make sure I caught it correctly too. So let's say it's like for whoever's listening, they might want to work with you, and they're an unseasoned athlete. So the approach that you would potentially take, and maybe they're a little bit overweight, whatever the case is. So would you maybe advocate for going towards a little bit maybe of a lower carb diet for them to start off with, mainly to get them fat adapted, but also too, like it would probably help them lose a little bit of weight so they're not trudging around with so much extra body weight. It would make their runs a little bit comfortable, I guess you could say. And then as they progress, they drop the body weight down. They're probably even putting on a little bit of muscle mass if the protein's high enough. And then as the runs get more intensive, you then add the carbohydrates in as they're starting to peak, right? So like drop the carbs first, let them lose some weight, and then boom, 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 bring the carbs back in as it gets crazy.
Exactly. Well, and also I think it's important being proactive with the carbs. I'm not a reactionary. I don't like reacting. I don't want to wait until your body starts to show signs that it's failing to add the carbs back in. I want to proactively bring them in before your body gets to that breaking point. Because some people, a lot of people like to not fix it until it's broke. I don't like that. I'm like, no, we're gonna reinforce this before you get to that point. So that's why the phases are timed like they are, because I want to make sure that we're proactively bringing the carbs back in before your body says this is too much. I don't want you to have the bad week, right? Like I want you to never feel the bad week. A good example of this though is a client I just had. He just graduated the program. He's actually training for his first 100-miler right now. He came to me. He had ran a couple 50Ks. He had walked some 50-milers. So I mean, yeah, those are ultras, but like he didn't really, he struggled through them, right? He was doing like the conventional diet. He wasn't really training very well. He was just like trying to do something difficult. So I put him through the program. He worked with me for 5 months. We went through all 5 phases. And at the end of it, for his 50K, he shaved, I'm not kidding, 5.5 hours off of his 50K time. And he lost 25 pounds. And that's in a 5-month window.
Dang.
And he just went through the phases, just went through the program.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a pretty impressive cut of time, for sure.
I was like, damn, son.
Yeah. Here's another question I have for you. Maybe in terms of supplemented training, strength training that is incorporated, because I don't know if you do or not. Where does usually the strength training fit into the program, if anywhere? If like, let's say someone's coming to PR like a half marathon, where does the strength training come into play?
Yeah, so for me, strength training is just as important as nutrition and the running sessions themselves. I kind of think of an endurance athlete in terms of like their nutrition and exercise approach. It's kind of like a triangle, and there's nutrition, strength training, endurance training, right? And they all kind of come together to create this holistic, synergistic kind of situation for the athlete. So in terms of strength training, I really believe in 3 prongs that need to be hit, and that is functional, compound and anaerobic threshold, right? So like they need to have functional fitness, they need to be doing compound movements, and they need to be doing some kind of exercise at least once a week that stimulates their aerobic threshold. So like HIIT, Tabata, something like that. And so really my strength training programs, now they vary from person to person depending on limitations, where their weight's at when they start with me, how active they already are, injuries, right? Things like that come into consideration. But in general, that really kind of remains the same goal, is like, I want you doing exercises at least once or twice a week that is stimulating mobility strength, tendon strength, ankle mobility, all that, core mobility, all that jazz. I want you doing compound movements at least once or twice a week, back squat, bench press. I'm not a big fan of deadlifts, but because I think for runners, they blow their back outs more often than not with deadlifts. So just focus on, back squats, bench press, compound movements that really stimulate growth hormone, stimulate, anabolic receptors, things like that, and overall bone density. I think it's the big thing with compound movements that runners and endurance athletes in general don't think about, is the bone density aspect of compound movements that other exercises don't give you. If you don't put heavy weight on your back, you are not stimulating stronger bone density. And so I think it's an often neglected side of especially runners. And, they get like stress fractures and stuff. And they're like, why is this happening? And I'm like, it's because you don't squat. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's because you don't squat. And then anaerobic threshold, right? So HIIT, getting your heart rate high, teaching you how to move effectively and consistently under intense pressure.
Yeah, when you're tired.
Yeah. So when I'm working with someone on the strength training, those are kind of the 3 goals that I'm trying to hit when it comes to like helping them integrate it into their overall training.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. And I was going to ask you a question about this, like bad movements for training. Like, and obviously you brought up the deadlift, and I'm still actually a fan of the deadlift, but are there any other exercises, especially for when you're consulting with a client, or that you also have them avoid?
Unless they have limitations or injuries, not really. Like,
Okay.
honestly, and I know I personally think deadlifts are very overrated. I know people love them, and I have friends that I see like swear by them, and obviously they're like, because you can, and I can go deadlift 400 pounds if I want to. Like, I've done it before, I'll do it again. I just don't see the need for it because of the strain it puts on your glutes and your lumbar. And when you're running, especially when you're training for like ultras, you put so much strain on your glutes. I've had way too many athletes pull their backs on deadlifts.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. Like in terms of the deadlift, like, are there some functional life applications to be able to like bend over and pick something up off the ground? Yeah, but you can also use a bunch of other things like kettlebells and things like that. But from a muscular component, like, I honestly just don't think like doing deadlifts is going to get you like stronger legs. Like, you would be better off maybe doing like weighted lunges or Bulgarian split squats to get better glute development or hamstring development. I just think there are other movements that you can do better, or I think there are other movements that you can do that you would get better results from than just doing deadlifts. That's just my 2 cents. But
Yeah.
I think they have some functional applications, like I said.
Yeah, and like before I started running, I did deadlifts all the time, and they never
Yeah.
hurt my back. And it's just when I started running, every time I pulled my back 3 times in the past 6 years of running, past 5 years or so, rather. Every time I pulled my back, I was in the middle of a deadlift set. Every single time. And the last time it happened, I was doing, because I switched to sumos. I was like, maybe it's the conventionals the problem. Sumos, I was deadlifting 200 pounds, nothing. And just my back just went. And I was like, never again. I'm never touching these things ever again.
Yeah, makes sense. I had another question, maybe even switching gears here, because I had another question, and I asked this question because I feel like a lot of it, basically your thoughts on alcohol. And the reason why I ask this question is because I think a lot of people will sometimes justify or search for reasons to keep it in their diet. I'm just curious to see, like, when you're consulting and working with clients, like, what are your thoughts on alcohol, and how do you work with clients that ultimately want to keep it in their life, or and I can give you my 2 cents, but that ultimately want to keep it in their life as they're working with you from like a training or coaching perspective?
Yeah, so I think initially, like, let's just get the gunk out of the way. It's poison, right? It's poison. Alcohol is poison. Now that being said, there's obviously people like to drink it socially. Some people have a real fixation on it, right? So it really depends on the person. So the way I approach it is kind of like three ways of dealing with it. One is just explaining that it's a poison, it's a neurotoxin, and it's not going to ever give you a net benefit, even if in the moment it makes you feel calm. The negative repercussions later on are not worth it, like from just that standpoint. However, I work with human beings, and they like going to weddings, they like having a beer, with their friends. And so really I have two rules. I have two rules when I'm working with a client when it comes to alcohol. The first one is if they're going to have alcohol in general, I don't like them to have alcohol during a meal. So they need to have alcohol 2 hours before or after a meal. So if I have a client going on vacation, going on a cruise or something, I'll be like, listen, you can have a drink if you want. I'm not going to tell you no. But if you're going to have it, don't have it during a meal for two reasons. One, it impedes on the metabolism of all the other macronutrients in that food, which we don't want. Secondly, when you drink while eating, it dampers the psychoactive effects of alcohol. And so it makes you believe that you can have more. So what I find is if I have clients drink between meals, not only is it better for them metabolically, as good as you can get anyways, but also they tend to drink less because they get tipsy faster because the food isn't impeding on the absorption of the alcohol. And so I notice less intake and then a better metabolic response in general, given the circumstance. So that's rule number one. And then rule number two is they cannot drink within, like if we're like a beginning of the program, so the first like 8 weeks of the program, not allowed to touch it. And 8 weeks from a race, they are not allowed to touch it. So like those are my two like rules when it comes to alcohol. I try to be a little bit lenient because again, I come from a place where like I understand human beings. And I understand if I make it too rigid, you're just gonna do it behind my back anyways. And I'm really big, especially as someone that had an eating disorder and like hid from people and didn't tell people. I like total transparency and vulnerability with my clients. And so like if you're not willing to tell me you're doing something, that's a problem in of itself. So I want to make sure that I give you boundaries that make sense based off of what I know from like a nutritional standpoint and a metabolic standpoint. But I don't want to give you boundaries that are so rigid that you hide things from me because you want to partake, but you don't want to, deal with me getting on to you or something like that. So it's a hard thing to navigate at times, but I try my best to, again, just create rules that are that make sense, but they're not so overwhelming that people, my clients feel the need to not talk to me about it.
Totally. A question around the 8 week rule type of situation. Is there any reason, and I'm asking because maybe you have some data or insights behind this. And obviously, like you don't want to be drinking like, it always kind of like blew my mind just listening to podcasts, how people would like drink wine the night they would before like a race to just like help them sleep or relax. But in my opinion, I'd be like, dude, that's like literally the last thing you want to do. But why is there a certain reason for that time frame 8 weeks out from the race?
Yeah, so 8 weeks from the race is really one, it's to keep them focused. I think they're when you
Got it.
especially when you when I'm especially when I'm working with athletes that like have a serious goal, like a distance they've never ran or they want a PR. I think psychologically it's really important to have a level of self-control. And so I think not giving in to temporary pleasures, like because I'm always trying to play chess. I'm never playing checkers. And so when I'm giving a client advice, I'm not just thinking about the metabolic repercussions, but I'm thinking about the psychological repercussions as well. So it's like it's not just about like what it might do to your recovery or due to the way you feel the next day, but also like I just want you to build a habit of telling yourself no because you're about to go into something where you have to learn to tell yourself no for 5 hours when it hurts. And so I like to build that muscle. In terms of metabolically, like just alcohol impedes on recovery. And when your running is that intense, it may help you sleep. But if you can't run your run the next morning as well, and you missed out on progress, and it's the alcohol's fault, that's a problem. And so those would be the two main reasons I have the 8 week block before a race. At the beginning, the 8 week at the beginning of a program, that's because it impedes on metabolic processes, and I'm trying to get you fat adapted, and I don't want the alcohol getting in the way of that process.
Makes complete sense. Makes absolute complete sense. Um, as we're coming up here on time, I just was curious, what are you currently working on now? Like, what's in the mix? Do you have any races on the books for yourself personally, or is there anything that you're doing? Oh, here we go. Here we
Yeah.
go.
No. So right now, well, I competed in my first. So I did ultras, and I still love like 50 mile. The 50 mile distance is my favorite. I've been able to podium at a 50 mile race. So it's definitely like I want to take another crack at it. But over the past, well, last year, so all of 2024, my goal was to run 100 miles, and I never got it. The first time I tried to do it, my knees gave out. Second time I tried to do it, I was a backyard ultra. My hip gave out at mile 80. I was still happy with that because like it wasn't like a 100 mile race. It was like just run as long as you can. But then I tried again last fall and I got sick. I got rhinovirus, but I tried to run it anyways, and I only made it like 40 miles because I wasn't eating or drinking. I just like I was so that race was just disgusting. So I never really hit it, and so I kind of was like burnt out from ultras because I just like it just felt like this like goal that I just couldn't reach at the moment. I'm sure I'll take another crack at it at some point. But I wanted something new, and so one of my friends invited me to do a high. They were trying to talk me into doing what's called a high rocks. You ever heard of
Oh
that?
yeah, yep.
So I was like, yeah, screw it. I'll sign up for one. So I signed up for one in March, so last month, and started training for it in December. Got into CrossFit. Never done CrossFit before, but got into CrossFit. Already had the endurance background. So trained for this thing, and then I did it. The night before, I broke my toe. It's a long story.
Oh
Wrapped it
no.
up, raced anyways. Did it okay. I got like an hour. I did it in like an hour and 13 minutes. I got in like the top like 12% of the competition. Right. Not, I mean, good, but like not something I'm satisfied with. And so I have two more high roxes in November. So I'm tentatively training for those two things. And then I have a bodybuilding competition in September that I'm going to start dieting for in June. So
Oh wow, that's crazy. So, so obviously, I mean, those are two completely different things, right? How are you going to, so how are you going to game plan like your prep, your food, your diet? Because like, yeah,
I
that's
like watching your brain. You're like, what?
yeah, I mean, that's two completely different things relatively close together. Like, what's the game plan going? Because you said the High Rocks was in November, the
Yeah.
bodybuilding show was before that. So how are you going to manage prepping for both of those? Obviously, because those are two completely different things and needing two completely different diet strategies,
Yeah.
essentially.
So I think two things. I think one, priorities. I think something going into it that I've already decided and I'm gonna stay very firm on is that my priority is the high rocks, not the bodybuilding competition. I'm doing the bodybuilding competition because one, I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Two, I do think that I would do better being a little bit lighter for these competitions. And so I thought it'd be a good incentive to diet down. I won't be the weight I'm at on stage. I'll probably
Yeah.
be heavier than that going into the high rocks, but I won't be as heavy as I am now. I'm like 190 right now. I'm sure I'll be like, this will help me get down to like 175 for the event, right? Which I'm sure will benefit me. So it seemed like a good incentive to like get me to stay consistent. I'm one of those guys, if I don't have a goal, it's really hard for me to just get shredded for no reason. Right. So
Yeah.
like knowing that I'm gonna have to step on a stage is gonna incentivize that. So I thought that would be good. And then it's my friend's show and I want to support him. So I decided I was gonna do it. But by all means, my focus is the high rocks. I'm not gonna like during this time, I'm not gonna be doing a bodybuilding split to like have the best delts on stage. Like the
Yeah.
package I bring to the stage is the package I bring to the stage. I'm much more focused on the events thereafter. And so as far as the dieting goes, I've given a lot of thought because part of me initially wanted to do like a strict ketogenic diet for the bodybuilding show because that's what I know to do. But with the volume of training I'm going to be doing for the high rocks, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so tentatively, this could change. Stay in contact with me. But right now, tentatively, the plan is to follow more of a low carb approach and just track calories and kind of like lower my calories strategically. Diet for the show, and then probably about a month out from the show, I'll probably pull back on the training intensity a little bit and kind of like let my body and my inflammation relax, drop that bit of water weight that I know I'm going to be holding because of the intensity of everything. Let my body kind of recover and peak for the show. And then right after the show, go right into peaking for the high rocks competition.
Dude, that's
Um,
going to be interesting to watch, man. Like
it's gonna be, yeah, dude.
you got to post all that stuff in terms of like your process, your day to day, like the cutting for the show, and then getting back on track for High Rocks. Like, you got to post all that stuff.
Yeah,
That's
because
going to be interesting to see how you pull that off.
I think they're 8 weeks apart. So like I'll get done with the show, and then like I've got basically 6 to 7 weeks to like finish peaking for this High Rocks, and then I'll taper for that. So and I don't know, I'm psychotic. I just like doing crazy crap, and this just seemed like a really impossible task, and I was like, screw it, let's sign up for both, let's just do it.
Dude, that's awesome, man. I can't wait to watch. Like, I hope you really do post all that stuff, because that's going to be really cool to see like how you game plan that. So that's exciting, man. I'm looking forward to seeing how you do. And by the way, like, this was fantastic, Jonathan.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to meet you, man. Like, I think you and I vibe on a lot of different things. I'd love to have you back on and just dive more into like other aspects of training or coaching or whatever the case is, or even bodybuilding, like going through the bodybuilding prep and how you're attacking that. And, that'll be interesting to chat with you about. But, yeah, like, where can people find you online? Like, how can people get in touch with you? Like, whether it's personally or whatever the case is.
Yeah, so anything The Keto Road, so Instagram The Keto Road, Facebook The Keto Road. If you want to email me, theketoroad@gmail.com. We have a website where you can contact me. You can schedule a free strategy call if you want to, like, if you're even interested in working with me. First call is free. I just like to figure out who you are. I don't work with anybody. You can find that at theketoroad.com. I have a podcast called the Low Carb Endurance and Performance podcast. So that's fun. I'm going to be talking about my whole process on there as well. And then the YouTube, the Keto Road. So really, if you type the Keto Road in anything, I'm probably going to pop up.
Awesome, man. Well, guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the Low Carb Consultant Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.